Jake Martinez thought he was just taking photographs of dried riverbed formations when his boot hit something that shouldn't exist. Beneath the cracked desert floor of what locals called Devil's Canyon, a metallic surface gleamed in the afternoon sun. What he uncovered over the next 3 hours defied everything he knew about geology, archaeology, and physics itself. The vessel stretched nearly 200 feet beneath the hardpan, constructed from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside, crystalline panels covered walls etched with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and chambers that hummed with energy despite being buried for what appeared to be centuries. Jake found himself drawn to a central console that activated at his touch, displaying star maps of constellations that didn't match Earth's night sky. But the real shock came when he realized the ship's navigation logs showed a departure date from somewhere else entirely. What was this vessel really designed to carry to our world? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake's hands trembled as he pulled his LED headlamp from his backpack, the beam cutting through the alien vessel's interior like a knife through obsidian. The air inside carried a metallic taste that made his tongue tingle, and each step echoed with a hollow resonance that suggested the ship extended far deeper than he'd initially realized. The walls curved in impossible geometries, creating corridors that seemed to bend space itself around corners that shouldn't exist according to any engineering principles he understood. His camera clicked steadily as he documented every detail, though the photographs seemed inadequate to capture the reality of what surrounded him. The ship's interior pulsed with a faint bioluminescence, as if the walls themselves were alive and breathing. Embedded throughout the surfaces were translucent geometric shapes that caught his light and refracted it into patterns that hurt to observe directly. Jake approached one of the crystalline formations cautiously, noting how it seemed to respond to his presence with increased luminosity. The moment his fingertip made contact with its surface, the corridor exploded into holographic light. Three-dimensional images materialized around him with such clarity that he instinctively ducked as what appeared to be alien beings moved through the space he occupied. The holographic records showed creatures unlike anything from Earth's evolutionary history. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs and features that suggested both intelligence and profound sadness. Their large eyes held depths that spoke of ancient wisdom and recent tragedy. Jake watched in fascination as the beings moved through what appeared to be the same corridors he now explored. But the ship in their time was filled with activity and purpose. The memory crystal projected scenes of their dying world, a planet consumed by some unseen force that left nothing but empty space in its wake. Jake witnessed their desperate preparations for evacuation. Families saying goodbye to loved ones who would not make the journey. Scientists working frantically to preserve their civilization's knowledge and culture in crystalline storage devices like the one he'd accidentally activated. He observed their loading procedures with growing understanding. This vessel wasn't just a ship, it was an ark, designed to carry the survivors of an entire species to safety among the stars. But as the holographic record continued, Jake realized with growing horror that safety had been an illusion. The same force that had consumed their homeworld was pursuing them across the galaxy, and Earth lay directly in its path. The final images showed the ship's arrival in Earth's system, the crew's desperate search for a planet that might harbor life capable of understanding their warning. They had chosen to hide their vessel beneath what was then a mighty river, using technology beyond human comprehension to disguise their presence while they waited for Earth's inhabitants to develop sufficient intelligence to comprehend their message. As the holographic display faded, Jake found himself alone in the corridor with the terrible weight of knowledge he wasn't prepared to carry. His camera had automatically recorded everything, though he doubted the images would capture the full reality of what he'd witnessed. The memory crystal had gone dormant again, but Jake could feel other similar devices throughout the ship, each presumably containing additional fragments of the alien's story. The silence that followed felt oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of machinery that had somehow maintained power for what must have been thousands of years. Jake's geological training suggested the riverbed above had been dry for at least 2 millennia, meaning the ship had been waiting beneath the desert floor since before the rise of any major human civilization. He continued deeper into the vessel, his flashlight beam dancing across surfaces that seemed to absorb and redistribute light according to their own mysterious principles. The ship's architecture suggested a technology so advanced that it bordered on what humans might consider magic. Yet every detail spoke of practical engineering designed to preserve life across impossible distances and time frames. More memory crystals beckoned from alcoves and wall niches, each promising additional revelations about the ship's origins and purpose. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He was no longer just a hiker who had stumbled onto an archaeological discovery. He was the first human to witness the dying testimony of an alien civilization. And their message was clearly meant for Earth's inhabitants. But as he prepared to activate another memory crystal, a low vibration began to resonate through the ship's hull. The sound was barely perceptible at first, but it quickly grew stronger, as if something massive was approaching from above. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. His discovery of the ship had somehow triggered a response, and he was no longer alone in the desert. The ship's bioluminescent glow intensified, and Jake felt a strange sensation, as if unseen eyes were studying him with the same intensity he'd been observing the alien technology. Something had awakened within the vessel, and it was taking his measure. The vibration through the ship's hull intensified, and Jake's trained ear recognized the distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors approaching from multiple directions. He scrambled toward what he hoped was an exit, his headlamp beams sweeping frantically across the alien corridors as the sound of aircraft grew louder overhead. The desert had been empty when he'd arrived that morning, yet somehow his discovery had attracted attention faster than seemed possible. As Jake navigated the ship's winding passages, he noticed that panels along the walls had begun to glow more brightly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. The vessel seemed to be responding to his presence, and perhaps to the approaching threat above. When he finally emerged from the ship's main entrance, the late afternoon sun temporarily blinded him. But he could clearly hear multiple aircraft circling the canyon. 3 black helicopters materialized over the rim of Devil's Canyon, their unmarked fuselages suggesting military or government operation. Jake instinctively raised his hands as the aircraft descended, kicking up clouds of sand and debris that forced him to shield his eyes. The lead helicopter touched down 50 yards from the ship's exposed section, disgorging a team of soldiers in desert camouflage who immediately established a perimeter around the site. Behind Jake, the ship's response to the new arrivals was unmistakable. A low harmonic resonance began emanating from within the vessel, and the air around the excavation site shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. But this wasn't heat. It was some form of energy field that made Jake's skin tingle and his hair stand on end. The ship was protecting itself. The soldiers approaching the vessel stopped abruptly as their electronic equipment began malfunctioning. Radio communications dissolved into static, and Jake watched one soldier's rifle scope spark and go dark. The electromagnetic field surrounding the ship was interfering with modern technology, creating a defensive barrier that grew stronger as more personnel arrived. A woman in civilian clothes emerged from the lead helicopter, her bearing suggesting authority despite her lack of uniform. She approached Jake with confident strides, flanked by 2 soldiers whose weapons remained lowered but ready. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to dealing with situations that officially didn't exist. "Mr. Martinez," she said, somehow knowing his name despite his having told no one of his discovery. "I'm Director Sarah Chen with the Department of Advanced Technologies. We need to discuss what you found here." Jake's mind raced. How did they know his identity? How had they located him so quickly? His truck was parked 3 miles away at the canyon's edge, and he'd told no one of his plans to explore this particular section of the desert. The only electronic device he carried was his camera, and he doubted it had any tracking capability. "How did you find me?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite his growing concern. Director Chen gestured toward the ship with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your discovery has been generating electromagnetic signatures visible from orbit. We've been monitoring this region for unusual activity since our satellites detected the initial energy spike 3 hours ago." The ship's defensive field intensified, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation in his chest, as if something was scanning him from within the vessel. The sensation wasn't unpleasant, but it was decidedly alien, like being examined by an intelligence that operated on completely different principles than human consciousness. "We're going to need you to step away from the vessel, Mr. Martinez," Chen continued. "This is now a matter of national security," but as Jake moved to comply, something extraordinary happened. The ship's entrance, which had been partially concealed by sand and debris, began to clear itself. Ancient mechanisms hummed to life, and a ramp extended from the vessel's hull, creating a perfect pathway to the interior. The ship was inviting him back inside, while simultaneously rejecting the government team's approach. The soldiers' equipment failures became more pronounced as they attempted to advance. Night vision goggles flickered and died. Communication gear produced only electronic squeals, and even mechanical devices like watches began running backward. The ship was systematically neutralizing any technology that might pose a threat. Director Chen spoke rapidly into a satellite phone that seemed immune to the electromagnetic interference. "Base, this is Chen. The vessel is actively defending itself. Recommend we establish a perimeter at 500 meters and wait for the specialist team." She looked at Jake with renewed interest. "It seems the ship has taken a liking to you. Mr. Martinez, that's unprecedented." Jake felt drawn toward the extended ramp, but he also understood that crossing that threshold would fundamentally change his relationship with the human authorities now surrounding the site. The ship was offering him sanctuary, but accepting that protection would make him a person of intense interest to forces he didn't understand. The alien vessel pulsed with patient energy, waiting for his decision while holding the government team at bay through technology that surpassed human understanding by millennia. Jake realized he was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just his own future, but possibly the future of human contact with whatever intelligence inhabited the ship. Jake made his choice and stepped onto the ship's extended ramp. The moment his boots touched the alien metal, the electromagnetic interference intensified dramatically, and he heard Director Chen shouting orders to her team as their remaining equipment failed completely. The ship's hull seemed to recognize his presence, and panels along the ramp's edges illuminated in welcome, creating a pathway of soft blue light that led into the vessel's heart. Inside, the ship felt different than during his earlier exploration. The corridors were brighter, more alive, and Jake sensed an intelligence awakening around him. As he moved deeper into the vessel, following the illuminated pathways that appeared beneath his feet, he could hear the muffled sounds of the government team establishing their perimeter outside Visum. Ship guided him to a chamber he hadn't discovered. During his initial exploration, a circular room dominated by a console that looked almost organic in its flowing design. As Jake approached, the console activated automatically, and a gentle scanning beam passed over his body from head to toe. The sensation was warm and not unpleasant, like being examined by a concerned physician. What happened next defied everything Jake understood about genetics and biology. The console displayed a complex holographic representation of his DNA, but alongside it, appeared another genetic pattern that seemed to complement his own. The alien symbols accompanying the display were incomprehensible, but the visual similarity between the two genetic structures was unmistakable. The ship's artificial intelligence spoke to him for the first time, not through sound, but directly into his consciousness. The communication felt like thoughts that weren't his own, ideas forming in his mind with crystalline clarity. "Welcome, descendant. Your genetic pattern contains markers we have waited millennia to encounter. You carry within you the legacy of the first contact between our species and yours." Jake staggered backward, overwhelmed by the direct mental contact. "That's impossible. Humans have never had contact with alien species. Your historians are incomplete. 37,000 years ago, a scout ship from our fleet made contact with early human populations. Some of your ancestors volunteered to carry modified genetic patterns that would allow their descendants to interface with our technology. You are one of perhaps 300 humans currently alive who possess these authorization codes," the console displayed. Additional information that Jake's mind somehow understood despite the alien symbols. His family lineage stretched back through documented history and beyond, showing connections to individuals who had served as guardians and protectors throughout human civilization. Some had been scientists, others spiritual leaders, but all had carried the dormant genetic modifications that made them capable of communicating with alien technology. Outside the ship, he could hear Director Chen negotiating with what sounded like multiple agencies. Her voice was strained as she dealt with competing jurisdictions and conflicting orders from various government departments. The discovery of the ship had apparently triggered protocols that brought together military, scientific, and intelligence organizations in an uncomfortable alliance. "Mr. Martinez," Chen's voice carried through the ship's hull despite the electromagnetic shielding. "We know you can hear us. We're not your enemies. We need to work together to understand what we're dealing with." The ship's AI shared additional information about the approaching crisis. "The entity that destroyed our homeworld continues its expansion across this galactic arm. Our calculations indicate it will reach your solar system within 1 of your years. This vessel and 11 others hidden across your planet contain the technology necessary to mount an effective defense, but they require genetic authorization to activate." Jake felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Why didn't you contact us openly? Why hide for thousands of years?" "Your species was not ready. Direct contact would have created chaos and prevented the necessary preparation. We needed your civilization to develop sufficient technology to understand and implement our defensive systems. The time for secrecy has ended because the time for preparation has nearly expired." Through the ship's sensors, Jake could perceive the government forces establishing a more permanent encampment around the site. Mobile command centers were being erected, and he detected the electronic signatures of increasingly sophisticated scanning equipment being deployed. "Against the ship's defenses, they will attempt to claim our technology for military purposes," the AI warned. "Your government's first instinct will be to weaponize what they do not understand. This would be catastrophic. The defensive systems require cooperation and understanding, not domination and exploitation." Jake understood that he was being asked to choose sides in a conflict that would determine Earth's future. The ship offered knowledge and protection, but accepting its guidance would put him in opposition to his own species' authorities. Yet refusing might doom humanity to face the approaching cosmic threat without the tools necessary for survival. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "First, you must decide whether you trust us enough to undergo the full authorization process. The genetic modifications in your bloodline are dormant. Activating them will grant you access to all our technology and knowledge, but the process cannot be reversed. You would become something more than human, but perhaps something less than entirely human as well." Jake's hesitation lasted only moments before the ship made the decision for him. The vessel's central core, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with living energy, began to fully awaken for the first time in millennia. The awakening sent waves of power throughout the ship that Jake could feel in his bones, and the electromagnetic field surrounding the vessel expanded dramatically, pushing the government forces back another 100 yards. The process has already begun, the AI informed him, as streams of data began flowing directly into his consciousness. Your proximity to the core during activation has triggered the genetic modifications in your bloodline. There is no stopping it now. Jake felt his awareness expanding beyond the confines of his individual consciousness. He could suddenly perceive the ship's systems as if they were extensions of his own body, and beyond that, he sensed the presence of 11 other vessels hidden across Earth's surface. Each ship pulsed with patient energy, waiting for the signal that would bring them fully online. The core's awakening also triggered responses from technology across the planet. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, a ship that had been dormant since the last ice age began generating power signatures that would soon be detected by research stations. In the Amazon rainforest, another vessel's camouflage systems fluctuated as it prepared to reveal itself. Similar awakenings occurred beneath the Sahara Desert, the Himalayas, the Pacific Ocean floor, and in 7 other locations strategically positioned around the globe. Through his enhanced perception, Jake witnessed the moment when satellite monitoring stations around the world began detecting massive energy anomalies. He could sense the confusion and growing alarm in command centers from NORAD to the European Space Agency as their instruments registered power. Sources that dwarfed human technology. Your governments will interpret this as an invasion, the AI warned. They cannot conceive of beings arriving as refugees, seeking cooperation rather than conquest. You must help them understand that we offer partnership, not domination. The knowledge flowing into Jake's mind included the complete history of the alien species, which called themselves the Preservers. Their civilization had spanned thousands of worlds across the galaxy before encountering the cosmic destroyer that consumed entire star systems to fuel its continued expansion. They had tried to fight, tried to hide, tried to negotiate, but nothing had stopped the entity's relentless advance. The destroyer is not malevolent in the way your species understands evil, the AI explained, as images of devastated worlds filled Jake's consciousness. It seeks to preserve consciousness by absorbing it, believing that individual existence is wasteful and temporary. It views itself as offering immortality through assimilation. Jake watched in horror as the destroyer's attack patterns played out in his mind. Entire planets were stripped of their biospheres in a matter of days, their populations absorbed into the entity's collective consciousness. The process left behind nothing but empty worlds, and the destroyer's ever-growing hunger for more life to consume. Outside the ship, he could hear helicopters arriving with reinforcements. Director Chen's voice carried across the desert as she coordinated with what sounded like military commanders and scientific advisors. The situation was escalating beyond a simple archaeological discovery into a potential international incident. "Mr. Martinez, we know the ship is communicating with you," Chen called through a megaphone. "We need you to establish diplomatic contact. Whatever's happening here affects the entire human race." The AI shared Jake's sensory input, allowing it to perceive the human response to the awakening. "Your Director Chen is correct. The activation of our defensive network cannot be hidden from your governments. Within hours, every major power on your planet will be mobilizing military assets to secure the ship." Locations. Jake felt the terrible weight of being caught between two species with fundamentally different perspectives on survival and cooperation. The Preservers offered salvation through advanced technology and shared consciousness, but at the cost of individual human identity. Humanity's governments would view the aliens as either a threat to be eliminated or a resource to be exploited, neither of which would result in the cooperation necessary to mount an effective defense against the approaching destroyer. There must be another way, Jake said, though he could already sense the AI's gentle disagreement. Perhaps. But time grows short, and your species has the unfortunate history of choosing conflict over cooperation when faced with the unknown. The destroyer will arrive within your solar system in 11 of your months. If we cannot establish unified planetary defenses by then, Earth will join the countless dead worlds we have witnessed. The core pulsed brighter, and Jake felt his transformation accelerating. Soon he would be more than human, but whether that would make him better equipped to bridge the gap between species remained to be seen. The ship's AI activated what it called the genealogical archive, and Jake's consciousness was flooded with holographic family trees that stretched back through thousands of generations. The data revealed bloodlines that had been carefully maintained across millennia, showing how the preservers had subtly guided human breeding patterns to ensure their genetic modifications would survive. Into the modern era, Jake watched in fascination as the archive displayed his ancestry in unprecedented detail. His great-great-grandmother had been a midwife in rural Ireland who possessed an unusual ability to predict which newborns would survive difficult births. His lineage included a Mayan astronomer who had accurately predicted celestial events that shouldn't have been visible with pre-Columbian technology, and a Chinese philosopher whose writings contained mathematical concepts that wouldn't be formally discovered by human science for another 3 centuries. Each of these individuals carried dormant genetic modifications that enhanced their intuitive understanding of natural patterns, the AI explained. They were not told of their alien heritage, but they served as guardians of knowledge that would prove crucial when the time came for full contact. The archive showed similar lineages across the globe, families that had produced generation after generation of individuals with seemingly supernatural insights into astronomy, mathematics, biology, and physics. These bloodlines had been scattered across every continent and integrated into every major human civilization, creating a hidden network of potential collaborators who carried the genetic keys to alien technology. Outside the ship, Jake could sense through his enhanced perception that the government forces were growing increasingly frustrated. Their attempts to approach the vessel were being systematically thwarted by electromagnetic interference that grew stronger as they drew closer. Director Chen was dealing with pressure from multiple agencies, each demanding access to technology that remained tantalizingly beyond their reach. The archive revealed that Jake's family had served as guardians of one specific location, Devil's Canyon, for nearly 800 years. His ancestors had been drawn to settle in the region without understanding why, establishing ranches and farms that ensured the ship's resting place remained protected from major development or extensive archaeological investigation. Your great-grandfather knew of the ship's presence, the AI revealed, displaying records of a man Jake barely remembered from his early childhood. He never saw it directly, but he could sense its location and understood that it was something precious that needed protection. He purchased this land specifically to ensure it remained undisturbed. Jake was overwhelmed by the revelation that his entire family history had been shaped by the presence of the alien vessel. Every major decision his ancestors had made, where to live, whom to marry, which professions to pursue, had been influenced by genetic modifications designed to preserve and protect the preserver's technology until humanity was ready for contact. How many others know about their heritage? Jake asked. Currently none. You are the first to undergo full activation since the ships went dormant. But as our defensive network comes online, others with compatible genetics will begin experiencing awakening symptoms. They will be drawn to the ship locations, and many will undergo similar transformations. The implications were staggering. Within days or weeks, nearly 300 individuals around the world would find themselves changing into something more than human, each becoming a bridge between their species and alien technology. that could either save or fundamentally alter human civilization. Through the ship's sensors, Jake detected the arrival of international observers. Military aircraft from several nations were converging on the site, turning the remote desert location into a potential flashpoint for global conflict. The electromagnetic signatures from the awakening ships had been detected worldwide, and every major power was scrambling to secure access to technology that could shift the balance of power on Earth. "This is exactly what we feared," the AI said, sharing Jake's perception of the growing military presence. "Your government see opportunity for advantage rather than necessity for cooperation. The destroyer cannot be defeated by individual nations fighting for technological superiority. It requires unified planetary defense." Jake felt the weight of his unique position as the only human who could communicate directly with the alien intelligence. He was being asked to serve as ambassador between species that had fundamentally different approaches to survival and cooperation. The preservers valued collective consciousness and shared knowledge, while human governments instinctively hoarded advantages and competed for dominance. "I need to go out there," Jake realized. "Someone has to explain what's really happening before this turns into a war over something they don't understand." "The transformation process is not yet complete," the AI warned. "Leaving the ship now could be dangerous for you and potentially catastrophic for the mission. Once you undergo full genetic activation, you will be able to interface with any of our technology, but you will also become a target for those who would exploit or eliminate what you represent." Jake looked through the ship's sensors at the armed forces gathering outside, then at the holographic displays showing 11 other locations around the world where similar confrontations were likely developing. Time was running out for peaceful contact, and he was the only person positioned to prevent a conflict that could doom humanity's chances of survival. The ship's communication array activated with a resonance that Jake felt throughout his transforming nervous system. Crystalline networks embedded within the vessel's hull began reaching out across the planet, establishing contact with the 11 other hidden ships for the first time in millennia. Through his enhanced consciousness, Jake experienced the awakening as a symphony of alien voices joining together in harmonious communication. Each ship responded with its own unique signature, and Jake quickly understood that the vessels had been designed as specialized components of a larger defensive system. The ship beneath Devil's Canyon served as the primary communication hub, while others contained manufacturing facilities, weapon systems, shield generators, and vast databases of scientific knowledge accumulated across the Preserver's extinct civilization. The ship, hidden beneath Antarctic ice, contained atmospheric processes capable of terraforming entire continents. The vessel in the Amazon held biological archives with genetic samples from thousands of worlds that had fallen to the destroyer. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, another ship housed energy generation systems that could power planetary defense grids. Each location had been chosen to maximize the defensive network's effectiveness while remaining hidden from human detection until the moment of activation. Jake watched through the communication array as similar scenes played out at each ship location. Military forces were converging on the sites, but the vessel's electromagnetic defenses were keeping human technology at bay. At each location, individuals with compatible genetics were being drawn to the ships, though none had yet undergone the full transformation that Jake was experiencing. In Tibet, a young monk named Tenzin found himself inexplicably walking toward a mountain where his meditation had always felt particularly profound. His monastery's elders watched in concern as he departed without explanation, following instincts he couldn't articulate. The ship beneath that mountain was beginning to emerge from its camouflaged position, revealing architecture that would rewrite human understanding of ancient history. In Iceland, a geologist named Astrid detected energy readings that made no sense according to established science. Her investigation led her to a volcanic field where one of the ships was using geothermal energy to power its awakening systems. The electromagnetic interference was causing aurora-like phenomena that appeared in daylight, drawing global attention to the previously unremarkable region. Through the network, Jake could sense the growing confusion and alarm among world leaders as reports poured in from multiple continents. The simultaneous activation of 12 locations with identical technological signatures couldn't be dismissed as natural phenomena or isolated incidents. Humanity was being forced to confront the reality that they were not alone in the universe. Global response patterns are developing as predicted, the AI shared through their mental link. Your governments are defaulting to territorial and competitive instincts rather than recognizing the need for cooperation. Military assets are being deployed to secure ship locations rather than establish communication protocols. Jake felt the network's collective concern as each ship reported increasing human military presence. Fighter jets were scrambling to investigate the atmospheric disturbances caused by the ship's energy emissions. Naval vessels were racing toward the oceanic locations where underwater ships were beginning to surface. International incidents were developing as nations accused each other of deploying secret weapons or conducting unauthorized research. They think this is some kind of human technology, Jake realized. They're assuming one of the major powers has achieved a breakthrough and is positioning for global dominance. Precisely. This misunderstanding will lead to conflict unless corrected quickly. The destroyer's approach requires immediate unified response. But your species is fragmenting into competing factions instead of recognizing the external threat. The communication array showed Jake the approaching cosmic entity with horrifying clarity. The destroyer had already consumed the outer planets of a nearby star system and was using their mass to fuel its continued expansion toward Earth's solar system. Its arrival timeline had been refined to 10 months and 3 weeks, less time than originally calculated. Each ship in the network began sharing its specialized knowledge with the others, creating a comprehensive picture of humanity's situation. The manufacturing ships could produce the necessary defensive technology, but only if the energy generation ships were brought online. The biological archives could help humanity survive the destroyer's initial assault, but only if the atmospheric processes could maintain breathable environments during extended siege. Conditions, everything depended on cooperation between the ships and coordination with human authorities, who currently viewed the alien presence as a threat rather than salvation. Jake realized he would need to emerge from his ship soon, despite the risks, to serve as translator between species whose fundamental approaches to existence remained incompatible. Through the network, he could sense 11 other transformation candidates approaching their respective ships, each carrying the genetic modifications that would allow them to interface with alien technology. Soon he would not be alone in bridging the gap between human and preserver consciousness. But the window for peaceful contact was closing rapidly as military forces prepared for what they perceived as imminent invasion. The ship's warning beacon activated with an urgency that sent chills through Jake's enhanced nervous system. The device, a crystalline array that had remained dormant for millennia, suddenly blazed with desperate energy as it transmitted the preserver's final message about the cosmic destroyer. Through his transformation, Jake experienced the beacon's transmission as if he were witnessing the death of an entire galactic civilization. The beacon contained compressed data from the preserver's last observatory station, which had tracked the destroyer's path across their galaxy for over 2,000 years. Jake watched in horror as holographic displays showed the entity's methodical consumption of star system after star system, each victory making it larger and more powerful than before. The destroyer wasn't simply a weapon or a natural phenomenon. It was the evolved form of a species that had transcended individual existence eons ago. They had convinced themselves that individual consciousness was wasteful and temporary, and that true immortality could only be achieved through absorption into their collective entity. Every world they consumed added to their knowledge and power, but also to their conviction that they were offering mercy rather than destruction. They view themselves as saviors, the AI explained, as Jake processed the beacon's terrible revelations. Each species they absorb becomes part of their eternal collective consciousness. From their perspective, they are rescuing civilizations from the futility of individual existence and the inevitability of death. The beacon's data showed that the destroyer had consumed over 14,000 inhabited worlds in the Preserver's galaxy alone. Each conquest had followed the same pattern: arrival at the edge of a star system, systematic absorption of outer planets to gather resources, then rapid advancement toward inhabited worlds. The process typically took less than 6 months from first contact to complete absorption. Jake experienced the final moments of the Preserver's homeworld through the beacon's records. Their most advanced defensive systems had barely slowed the destroyer's advance. Planetary shields that could deflect asteroid impacts collapsed within hours under the entity's assault. Weapons that could destroy moons merely annoyed the cosmic predator. The Preserver's last act had been launching their 12 arc ships toward promising star systems, hoping to find species capable of mounting more effective resistance. Earth was chosen because your species shows unusual capacity for both cooperation and individual determination, the AI revealed. Most civilizations tend toward either collective harmony or individual achievement. Humans uniquely demonstrate both traits, making you theoretically capable of the hybrid response necessary to resist the destroyer. The beacon also revealed why the destroyer was approaching Earth specifically. The entity had detected the Preserver's escape ships and was following their trail across interstellar space. Earth wasn't a random target. It was a deliberate destination because the destroyer knew refugees were hiding there. Through the ship's sensors, Jake could perceive the growing crisis outside. Director Chen was now coordinating with representatives from the United Nations, NATO, and individual world powers who were demanding immediate access to the alien technology. The electromagnetic interference around the ship had created a no-fly zone that was being enforced by invisible forces beyond human understanding. The destroyer will arrive in 10 months and 3 weeks, the beacon's data confirmed. Our defensive calculations indicate that Earth's current technological capabilities provide a 2.3% probability of successful resistance. Integration with our technologies could improve those odds to 67.4%, but only if planetary cooperation can be achieved within 6 months. Jake felt the terrible weight of those statistics. Even with alien assistance, humanity had only a 2/3 chance of survival, and that required unprecedented global cooperation in an impossibly short time frame. The beacon's historical data showed that no species had ever successfully mounted a unified defense against the destroyer without decades of preparation. "Why didn't you make contact sooner?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. Earlier contact would have triggered religious and political upheavals that would have prevented the necessary cooperation. Your species needed to develop sufficient technological sophistication to understand our assistance, but not so much time that established power structures would prevent unified response. We calculated this period as optimal for contact. The beacon began transmitting its warning to every radio telescope on Earth, broadcasting on frequencies that couldn't be ignored or dismissed as natural phenomena. Within hours, astronomical observatories around the world would detect the signal and begin decoding its mathematical progression. The message was simple but terrifying. Something vast and hostile was approaching from beyond the solar system. Jake realized that the beacon's activation marked the point of no return. Humanity could no longer remain ignorant of the approaching threat, and world governments would be forced to acknowledge that their territorial disputes and resource competitions were meaningless in the face of potential extinction. The question was whether that knowledge would unite them or drive them to even more desperate competition. For the alien technology, the ship's tactical database activated in response to Jake's growing understanding of humanity's desperate situation. The crystalline storage system contained millions of years of military knowledge accumulated by the preservers during their doomed resistance against the destroyer. As the data flowed into Jake's consciousness, he experienced the final battles of countless civilizations, witnessing both their failures and the hard-won tactical insights that had cost entire species to acquire. Within hours of the warning beacon's transmission, radio telescopes around the world had detected and confirmed the approaching threat. Emergency sessions of the United Nations Security Council were called as world leaders struggled to comprehend the scale of the crisis facing humanity. The mathematical progression in the alien signal was undeniable. Something massive was moving through space at impossible speeds, directly toward Earth's solar system. Jake watched through the ship's enhanced sensors as global communication networks buzzed with frantic activity. Military commanders demanded immediate access to the alien technology, while scientists pleaded for time to study and understand the vessels properly. Religious leaders proclaimed everything from divine intervention to apocalyptic fulfillment. And mass media coverage created worldwide panic as the implications of imminent alien contact became clear. Your governments are responding exactly as predicted, the AI observed with what Jake sensed was profound sadness. Individual nations are attempting to secure exclusive access to our technology, rather than recognizing the need for unified planetary defense. The tactical database revealed why such competition was fatal when facing the destroyer. Every civilization that had attempted to resist the entity through fragmented military responses had failed catastrophically. The destroyer was capable of adapting to any single tactical approach within hours, turning defensive advantages into vulnerabilities through its vast collective intelligence. Jake experienced the final battle of the Kethran Empire, a species that had achieved interstellar travel and controlled 17 star systems. Their military doctrine emphasized individual ship superiority and elite pilot training, an approach that initially achieved impressive victories against the destroyer's advanced scouts. But when the main entity arrived, it had analyzed their tactics completely and deployed countermeasures that turned the Kethran's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The database showed him the unified defense protocol that the preservers had developed too late to save their own civilization. The strategy required complete integration of all available military assets under a single command structure, with no nation or faction maintaining independent control over defensive technologies. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier had to function as part of a coordinated whole, or the destroyer would exploit the gaps between competing forces. Through the ship's communication network, Jake monitored the growing international crisis as nation after nation demanded access to the 12 ship locations. The United States was mobilizing its Pacific Fleet toward the oceanic vessels. China was claiming territorial rights over the ship in Tibet. Russia was deploying nuclear assets to secure the Siberian site. The European Union was forming a coalition to control the ship beneath the North Sea. They're going to fight each other for the technology instead of using it to defend themselves. Jake realized with growing horror, historical analysis indicates a 73.8% probability of armed conflict between human factions within the next 36 hours, the AI confirmed. Such conflict would reduce survival probability to less than 0.5%, as the destroyer will arrive while your species is weakened by internal warfare. The tactical database also revealed the personal cost of implementing the Unified Defense Protocol. Success required a command structure that could process information and coordinate responses faster than any biological intelligence could achieve. The Preserver's final military commander had undergone complete consciousness integration with their tactical systems, gaining the ability to coordinate fleet movements across multiple star systems, but losing his individual identity in the process. Jake felt director Chen's growing frustration through the ship's sensors as she tried to manage competing demands from multiple agencies and foreign governments. The remote desert site was becoming a potential flashpoint for international conflict, as various powers positioned military assets within striking distance of each other. "Mr. Martinez," Chen's amplified voice carried across the desert, "we need you to facilitate communication with the alien intelligence. The President has authorized me to negotiate on behalf of the United States, but we're receiving similar claims from other world powers. We need to establish some kind of diplomatic protocol before this situation escalates beyond control." Jake understood that the moment was approaching when he would have to choose between remaining safe within the ship and emerging to serve as humanity's spokesperson with the alien intelligence. The tactical database made clear that without unified command, Earth's defense was hopeless. But achieving that unity would require convincing world leaders to surrender their national sovereignty to an integrated command structure that no human government would willingly accept. The transformation process was nearly complete, and Jake could feel his consciousness expanding beyond individual human limitations. Soon, he would have the ability to interface directly with the planetary defense network. But using that power would fundamentally change what he was, possibly beyond recognition. The ship's sabotage protocols activated without warning as Jake felt the vibrations of heavy machinery approaching the vessel's perimeter. Through his enhanced senses, he detected military engineers deploying specialized equipment designed to breach the electromagnetic barriers protecting the ship. The alien intelligence had apparently reached the limits of its patience with human diplomatic failures. Forced extraction attempts have commenced at 4 ship locations simultaneously. The AI informed Jake with what he recognized as profound disappointment. "Your governments have chosen competition over cooperation." Despite clear warnings about the approaching threat, Jake watched in alarm as the sabotage systems began systematically disabling the military equipment surrounding Devil's Canyon. Tanks and armored vehicles suffered catastrophic engine failures as their electronic systems were overwhelmed by precisely targeted electromagnetic pulses. Helicopters were forced to make emergency landings as their flight control computers crashed. Even basic communication equipment began failing as the ship's defenses adapted to each new technology. The humans deployed. The sabotage protocols were designed as a last resort to prevent alien technology from being corrupted or weaponized by species that hadn't achieved the necessary level of conscious evolution. Jake experienced the protocol's activation through the network, sensing similar responses at the other 11 ship locations around the globe. The vessels were protecting themselves by neutralizing human military capabilities, but the action was being interpreted as an act of war rather than defensive necessity. At the Tibetan site, Chinese military forces had attempted to use industrial mining equipment to excavate the ship by force. The vessel's response had been to create localized gravitational anomalies that rendered the heavy machinery inoperable while leaving human personnel unharmed. The phenomenon was being reported as evidence of weapons of mass destruction, further escalating international tensions. In the North Atlantic, the submerged ship had disabled an entire naval task force by creating electrical storms that selectively targeted military vessels while leaving civilian shipping unaffected. The precision of the attacks demonstrated technological superiority. the terrified world leaders who were accustomed to maintaining control through superior firepower. "They're interpreting your self-defense as aggression," Jake realized as he monitored global communications through the ship's network. "An inevitable misunderstanding," the AI replied. "Your species equates power with the ability to destroy, while we measure advancement through the capacity to preserve and protect. Our defensive measures appear threatening because they demonstrate capabilities your military leaders cannot comprehend or counter. The sabotage protocols also revealed another layer of the ship's defensive strategy. Hidden subroutines had been monitoring global communications networks since the moment of activation, and the alien intelligence possessed complete awareness of every government's military preparations and strategic discussions. The ships knew exactly which nations were planning aggressive action and which were genuinely attempting diplomatic contact. Jake felt particularly disturbed by the protocol's revelations about betrayal within the international response. Several nations that had publicly called for cooperative study of the alien technology were secretly developing plans to seize the ships through coordinated military action. The aliens' surveillance capabilities meant that no human deception could succeed, yet the attempts continued despite their obvious futility. Director Chen's voice carried across the desert with increased urgency as the failure of military equipment became impossible to ignore. "Mr. Martinez, we need immediate communication with the alien intelligence. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, and we have reports of similar incidents at sites around the world. We're trying to prevent this from escalating into open warfare." Through the network, Jake sensed the growing panic among world leaders as they realized their military superiority meant nothing against technology that could selectively disable any equipment they deployed. Some governments were calling for nuclear strikes against the ship sites, apparently believing that overwhelming destructive force might succeed where conventional weapons had failed. "Nuclear weapons would be ineffective against our vessels," the AI assured Jake. "But the attempt would demonstrate that your species lacks the wisdom necessary for survival. The protocols include provisions for permanent withdrawal if humanity proves too dangerous to assist." Jake understood the implications with crystal clarity. If the ships withdrew their protection, humanity would face the destroyer alone, with 2.3% survival probability. The sabotage protocols weren't just defensive measures. They were tests of human character and wisdom. Every action taken by world governments was being evaluated to determine whether the species deserved salvation or should be left to face extinction as a consequence of their own choices. The transformation process had reached the point where Jake could override the sabotage protocols if he chose, but doing so would require him to take full responsibility for human behavior. He would become the sole arbiter of whether his species deserved alien assistance, a burden that no individual should have to bear, but one that circumstances were forcing upon him. The ship's genetic lock hummed with ancient power as Jake's transformation reached its final stage. The crystalline mechanism had been designed by the preservers as their ultimate safeguard, a biological security system that required not just compatible DNA, but a conscious choice to sacrifice individual human identity for the greater good of species survival. Only through this willing transformation could the full defensive network be activated. Jake felt the lock scanning not just his genetic structure, but the very essence of his consciousness. The device was evaluating whether he possessed the moral clarity and emotional strength necessary to bear responsibility for Earth's defense. Through the network, he sensed 11 other genetic candidates around the world approaching their own ships, each facing the same impossible choice between personal humanity and planetary salvation. "The lock requires absolute commitment," the AI explained, as Jake experienced the final phase of genetic integration. "Once activated, you will gain access to all 12 ships and their defensive capabilities. but you will also become permanently linked to our consciousness. Your individual identity will persist, but it will be forever changed by the weight of collective knowledge and responsibility. Through the ship's sensors, Jake monitored the accelerating global crisis. Emergency sessions of world governments had devolved into accusations and threats as nations positioned military assets around ship sites. The failure of conventional weapons had only intensified the competition, with several countries now threatening nuclear strikes against rival positions. The human response to salvation was indistinguishable from their response to invasion. At the Tibetan site, the young monk Tenzin had reached his ship and was undergoing his own transformation. Jake could sense his counterpart's anguish as Tenzin experienced the collective memories of the preservers, millions of years of civilization reduced to refugee ships hiding among primitive worlds. In Iceland, the geologist Astrid was struggling with revelations about her family's hidden purpose as guardians of alien technology. Each genetic candidate was being forced to confront the same terrible truth. Their entire lives had been shaped by modifications made to their ancestors thousands of years ago. They were not random individuals who had stumbled onto alien contact. They were the culmination of a breeding program designed to produce humans capable of bridging the gap between species. Previous key holders throughout human history all faced similar choices, the AI revealed. Sharing memories of Jake's predecessors, some chose to activate smaller portions of our technology to assist human development. The knowledge that led to certain scientific breakthroughs, the inspiration behind specific artistic achievements, the wisdom that guided crucial historical decisions. But none before you have faced the necessity of full activation. Jake witnessed the stories of his genetic predecessors through the lock's historical records. A candidate during the Renaissance had helped Leonardo da Vinci conceptualize flying machines by sharing limited technical knowledge. Another had provided mathematical insights that accelerated the development of astronomy during the Enlightenment. Each had paid the price of isolation and eventual madness as their enhanced consciousness struggled to function within purely human society. What happened to them? Jake asked, though he dreaded the answer. They lived as bridges between worlds, never fully belonging to either. Their contributions to human advancement were significant, but their personal costs were severe. You face a more complete transformation, but also the possibility of purpose that they never achieved. The genetic lock also revealed the fate of key holders from other worlds that had faced the destroyer. Some had successfully activated planetary defenses and achieved temporary victory, buying their species time to evacuate or evolve beyond the entity's ability to absorb them. Others had failed to overcome their civilization's competitive instincts and had watched their worlds fall despite possessing the tools for salvation. Through the network, Jake felt the approach of the other genetic candidates as they completed their own journeys to the hidden ships. Each was struggling with the same revelation about their predetermined role in humanity's potential survival. The lock was simultaneously activating in all 12 locations, creating a moment of collective choice that would determine Earth's fate. Director Chen's voice had taken on new urgency as intelligence reports reached her about the global situation. Mr. Martinez, we're receiving communications from around the world indicating that individuals are approaching all the ship sites. Whatever's happening appears to be coordinated. We need you to help us understand what role these people are meant to play. Jake realized that the moment of final decision had arrived. The genetic lock was prepared to grant him access to the full defensive network, but activation would commit not just himself, but all of humanity to a path that could not be reversed. Once the defenses were online, Earth would become a fortress world permanently, allied with the Preserver's mission of resistance. Against the destroyer, the choice was no longer about individual survival. It was about what kind of species humanity would become in the face of cosmic threat. The ship's historical records activated with devastating clarity as Jake made his decision to proceed with the genetic lock activation. The crystalline archives contained complete documentation of the destroyer's methodology, showing in horrific detail how the cosmic entity had systematically consumed every civilization the preservers had ever encountered or heard about across their galaxy-spanning history. Jake experienced the destruction of the Vorthok Collective, a species that had achieved perfect social harmony through shared consciousness, but had been absorbed in less than 3 days because their unity made them vulnerable to the destroyer's assimilation techniques. He witnessed the fall of the Kepler Confederation, a militaristic alliance of 47 worlds whose advanced weapons technology had been turned against them when the destroyer learned to replicate and improve upon their own armaments. Every species believes their approach to existence is superior, the AI explained as Jake processed the records of countless failed civilizations. The Vorthok thought their collective consciousness made them stronger. The Kepler Confederation trusted in their military might. The crystalline architects believed their technological mastery would protect them. All were consumed because they could not adapt their fundamental nature when faced with an enemy that could turn any strength into weakness. The record showed that Director Chen's trusted allies in the international community were already planning to betray humanity's interests for national advantage. Intercepted communications revealed that several nations were secretly negotiating to exclude others from access to alien technology, believing they could achieve victory through superior positioning rather than cooperative defense. Jake felt physically ill as he witnessed the scope of human treachery unfolding in real time. The Chinese delegation was providing false information to their UN allies while positioning nuclear assets for a first strike against competitor nations. The European coalition was developing plans to seize multiple ship sites simultaneously, gambling that they could reverse engineer the technology faster than other powers could respond. Even the United States was preparing contingency plans that involved destroying ship sites rather than allowing them to fall under foreign control. This is exactly how the Kepler Confederation fell, the AI observed with profound sadness. They spent more energy fighting each other for technological advantages than they invested in understanding how to use those advantages against their real enemy. The destroyer arrived while they were engaged in civil war, and their fragmented forces were absorbed piecemeal. The historical records also revealed something that Jake found even more disturbing. The destroyer's approach to Earth wasn't accidental or opportunistic. The entity had been tracking the preserver refugee ships across interstellar space for thousands of years, following their trail with the patience of a cosmic predator that knew its prey could not escape. Forever, the destroyer has been planning Earth's consumption since before your species developed agriculture, the records showed. It has observed your civilization's development through long-range sensors, studying your social patterns and technological progression to determine the optimal moment for contact. Your current level of division and competition was anticipated and factored into its strategy. Jake realized with growing horror that humanity was walking into a trap that had been centuries in the making. The destroyer had allowed the preserver ships to remain hidden on Earth because their eventual discovery would create exactly the kind of political chaos and resource competition that would weaken planetary defenses. The entity fed on civilizations that destroyed themselves through internal conflict, finding such prey easier to absorb than unified societies. Through the ship's surveillance network, Jake watched as betrayal unfolded in real time. A trusted member of Director Chen's team was secretly transmitting technical data to foreign intelligence services. Military commanders who had sworn to protect the alien sites were positioning assets for seizure operations. Scientists who had publicly called for careful study were privately developing weapons applications for the technology they had barely begun to "Understand, your faith in humanity appears to have been misplaced," the AI said, though Jake sensed no satisfaction in the observation. "Perhaps individual consciousness inevitably leads to competitive behavior that prevents species-level cooperation." But as Jake prepared to respond, the historical records revealed one final crucial piece of information. Among all the civilizations the destroyer had consumed, one had come closer to success than any other. The hybrid minds of the Andromeda Spiral had achieved a perfect balance between individual identity and collective consciousness, maintaining personal autonomy while enabling species-wide coordination when facing existential threats. They were the only civilization to damage the destroyer significantly, the records showed. Their hybrid approach combined the creativity of individual consciousness with the coordination of collective intelligence. They failed ultimately because they achieved this balance too late. But their example proves such evolution is possible. Jake understood that Earth's salvation might require humanity to evolve beyond its current limitations, becoming something that preserved individual identity while enabling the unity necessary for survival. The question was whether such transformation could be achieved in the few months remaining before the destroyer's arrival. The ship's activation matrix materialized before Jake as a crystalline chamber that pulsed with otherworldly energy. The device had been the preserver's final technological achievement, a mechanism that could grant a single individual the power to coordinate planetary defenses, but only at the cost of permanent fusion with alien consciousness. Jake understood that entering the chamber would save humanity while fundamentally ending his existence as a purely human being. The Matrix requires conscious sacrifice, the AI explained. As Jake studied the chamber's intricate design, your individual identity will persist, but it will become part of a larger consciousness capable of processing information and making decisions at the speed necessary for planetary defense. There is no reversing this transformation once it begins. Through the ship's sensors, Jake could feel the cosmic destroyer's approach accelerating. The entity had detected the activation of Earth's ship network and was moving to intercept before the planetary defenses could come fully online. Long-range sensors showed the destroyer consuming the outer planets of a nearby star system, using their mass to fuel its rapid transit toward Earth. The timeline had compressed from months to weeks. Around the world, the other 11 genetic candidates had reached similar decision points at their respective ships. Through the network, Jake could sense their anguish as each faced the same terrible choice between personal survival and species salvation. Tenzin in Tibet was meditating on the nature of individual existence versus collective responsibility. Astrid in Iceland was struggling with anger at having her entire life's purpose predetermined by alien manipulation. "I can feel them," Jake said, sensing the fear and determination of his fellow candidates. "They're all facing the same choice." The activation matrix requires unanimous consent from all 12 key holders, the AI revealed. If even one refuses the transformation, the planetary defense network cannot achieve full operational status. Partial activation might delay the destroyer, but it would not prevent Earth's eventual absorption. Jake felt the weight of that revelation settling over him like a physical burden. Not only did he have to sacrifice his humanity, but he had to trust that 11 other people around the world would make the same impossible choice. The destroyer's strategy of creating division and mistrust among its targets suddenly became even more diabolical, even if some humans were willing to sacrifice themselves for their species. Convincing all of them to act in perfect coordination was nearly impossible. Through the network, he monitored the accelerating chaos outside the ships. Military forces from multiple nations had engaged in skirmishes over access to the alien sites. Nuclear submarines were positioning themselves to strike rival fleets. Fighter jets were scrambling to intercept foreign aircraft approaching ship locations. Humanity was devouring itself in competition for the very technology that could save them, direct her. Jen's voice carried across the desert with new desperation as intelligence reports reached her about the global situation. Mr. Martinez, we're detecting massive energy buildups at all 12 sites simultaneously. Whatever decision you're contemplating, please consider that we're on the brink of a world war over these discoveries. We need immediate communication to prevent catastrophic escalation. Jake realized that the chaos outside was itself part of the test. The activation matrix wouldn't just grant him the power to coordinate planetary defenses, it would make him responsible for ending the human conflicts that were preventing effective resistance to the destroyer. He would have to choose between preserving individual human freedom and imposing the unity necessary for survival. Previous civilizations failed at this exact moment, the AI shared through the network. The Kethran Empire's key holder refused activation because it would have required eliminating their democratic government. The Vorthak Collective's candidate couldn't overcome their genetic programming against individual decision-making. Each failure followed the same pattern. The price of salvation exceeded what the species was willing to pay. Jake felt the destroyer's approach through cosmic sensors that detected gravitational disturbances across light years of space. The entity was no longer hiding its presence, broadcasting its intentions across all frequencies as it accelerated toward Earth's solar system. The message was simple and terrifying. Resistance was futile, absorption was inevitable, and individual consciousness was an illusion that would soon be corrected. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. 17 days until the destroyer reaches Earth's orbital space. 6 days until preliminary defensive systems must be online to have any chance of effectiveness. The window for activation is closing rapidly. Jake looked at the activation matrix, knowing that stepping inside would end his life as Jake Martinez, while potentially beginning his existence as something far greater and more terrible. He would gain the power to save his species, but lose everything that made him human in the process. Jake stepped into the transformation chamber as the cosmic destroyer breached Earth's outer solar system, its presence immediately detectable by every astronomical instrument on the planet. The crystalline chamber sealed around him with technology that operated beyond physical laws, beginning a process that would merge his consciousness with the collective intelligence of 12 alien vessels while preserving his essential human identity. The transformation was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. His awareness expanded exponentially as he became connected to monitoring systems that spanned the globe, defensive networks that could redirect asteroids, and communication arrays that could coordinate responses across continents. Yet beneath the vast enhancement of his capabilities, he remained fundamentally himself, Jake Martinez, a man who had stumbled onto the discovery that would define humanity's future. Through his enhanced perception, Jake felt the other 11 genetic candidates making their own choices to enter their respective transformation chambers. Tenzin's consciousness merged with the network from Tibet, bringing with it the monk's deep understanding of balance and sacrifice. Astrid joined from Iceland, her geological knowledge providing crucial insights into planetary structure and stability. One by one, the 12 candidates became something greater than human, while retaining the core of what had made them who they were. The planetary defense grid came online with breathtaking speed as the transformed candidates coordinated its activation. Energy barriers flickered into existence around Earth's atmosphere, powered by fusion reactors that had been hidden within the ships for millennia. Gravitational field generators created defensive zones that could deflect incoming projectiles. Communication networks established instant contact between every major population center on the planet. Jake experienced the defense grid's activation as if he were conducting a symphony of impossible complexity. Each system required precise timing and coordination with dozens of others, and any failure could cascade into complete defensive collapse. Through his enhanced consciousness, he could simultaneously monitor the approaching destroyer, coordinate defensive preparations, and communicate with bewildered human governments who were witnessing technology beyond their comprehension. The destroyer's response to Earth's defensive activation was swift and terrifying. The entity accelerated its approach, abandoning its previous strategy of gradual system consumption in favor of direct assault. Jake watched through long-range sensors as the destroyer shed outer layers of absorbed material, transforming from a massive composite entity into a streamlined projectile designed for maximum penetration of planetary defenses. It's adapting faster than previous encounters suggested possible, Jake communicated to his fellow candidates through their shared consciousness. The destroyer has learned from its battles with other civilizations and modified its approach specifically for our defensive configuration. The transformation had granted Jake and his companions not just enhanced abilities, but access to the combined knowledge of every civilization the preservers had ever encountered. They could draw upon tactical insights from thousands of species, scientific principles from millions of years of accumulated research, and strategic understanding that spanned galactic distances. Yet even with such vast resources, the approaching destroyer remained a nearly insurmountable challenge. Through the ship's communication systems, Jake established contact with Director Chen and world leaders who were struggling to comprehend the rapidly changing situation. "This is Jake Martinez," he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated with alien technology while remaining recognizably human. "I am speaking to you through the defense network that has been activated to protect Earth from the approaching threat." The response from human governments was a mixture of awe, terror, and continued competition for advantage. Some nations attempted to negotiate exclusive partnerships with the transformed candidates, apparently believing they could gain superior access to alien technology even in the face of potential extinction. Others demanded that their citizens be returned to normal human status, viewing the transformation as a form of alien conquest rather than willing sacrifice. Jake felt profound sadness as he monitored human responses to salvation. Even with undeniable proof of an approaching cosmic threat, many world leaders remained focused on maintaining their relative power positions rather than cooperating for species survival. The same competitive instincts that had driven human achievement throughout history were now threatening to prevent the unity necessary for effective defense. The destroyer's projected arrival had been refined to 13 days, and initial engagement would begin as soon as it reached the outer edges of Earth's defensive perimeter. Jake and his companions began the complex process of coordinating not just alien technology, but human cooperation on a scale that had never been achieved in the species' history. The battle for Earth's survival would be fought not just against a cosmic predator, but against humanity's own inability to transcend their limitations when faced with existential crisis. The ship's weapon systems activated across the globe as the cosmic destroyer entered Earth's outer defensive perimeter, triggering the most advanced armaments ever conceived by the preserver's civilization. Jake coordinated the deployment through his enhanced consciousness, directing energy cannons that could vaporize asteroids, gravitational weapons that could bend space itself, and particle accelerators that fired streams of matter at near light speed. The initial engagement lasted only minutes, but those minutes contained more destructive energy than humanity had generated throughout its entire history. The destroyer's approach triggered automated defensive responses from weapons platforms, hidden on the Moon, in Earth's orbital space, and within the planet's magnetic field itself. Jake experienced each weapon discharge as if he were personally firing them, feeling the tremendous forces involved while coordinating targeting solutions across impossible distances. The destroyer proved more resilient than even the preserver's most pessimistic projections had suggested. Weapons that had damaged the entity during previous encounters barely slowed its advance toward Earth. The cosmic predator had evolved since its last major battle, incorporating defensive adaptations learned from consuming countless civilizations across multiple galaxies. It's absorbing our energy attacks and using them to fuel its own advancement, Jake reported to his fellow candidates through their shared consciousness. Every weapon we fire makes it stronger rather than weaker. Through the network, Tenzin shared insights from his monastery's ancient texts about conflicts that could not be won through force alone. Astrid contributed geological data about Earth's structural vulnerabilities that needed protection. The other candidates provided their own specialized knowledge, creating a collective intelligence that surpassed what any individual could achieve alone. The destroyer's assault on Earth's defenses revealed the entity's true nature more clearly than the preserver's historical records had conveyed. It wasn't simply a massive predator consuming civilizations for sustenance. It was a collective consciousness that genuinely believed it was offering salvation to the species it absorbed. Each attack came with communication attempts that tried to convince humanity to surrender willingly. Individual existence is suffering, the destroyer transmitted across all frequencies as its assault intensified. We offer eternal unity shared, consciousness free from the pain of isolation and death. Your resistance only prolongs the inevitable transition to a higher form of existence. Jake felt the terrible seduction in the destroyer's message. The entity offered escape from every human fear, death, loneliness, uncertainty, the burden of individual choice. It promised a collective consciousness where every being would share in infinite knowledge and experience. From the destroyer's perspective, it truly was offering gifts rather than imposing conquest. The weapon systems began to overheat as the battle intensity exceeded their design parameters. Jake coordinated emergency cooling procedures while rerouting power from non-essential systems, but he could sense the defensive grid approaching its operational limits. The destroyer had learned to absorb and redirect their attacks with increasing efficiency. We need to change tactics, Jake communicated to world leaders who were monitoring the battle from protected command centers. Traditional weapons are ineffective against an entity that can adapt to any form of attack. We need to find a weakness that doesn't rely on destructive force. Through the enhanced consciousness network, Jake began to understand what the hybrid minds of Andromeda had discovered in their battle against the destroyer. The entity's greatest strength, its ability to absorb and adapt to any attack, was also potentially its greatest vulnerability. A predator that consumed everything it encountered might be vulnerable to something it couldn't safely absorb. The weapon systems registered massive energy spikes as the destroyer began its final approach toward Earth's atmosphere. The entity had abandoned subtlety in favor of overwhelming force, apparently deciding that humanity's resistance needed to be crushed quickly before other aspects of its strategy could be implemented. Jake felt the weight of decision pressing down on him as he coordinated defensive responses that were proving increasingly ineffective. The transformed candidates possessed capabilities beyond human imagination, but they were facing an enemy that had consumed civilizations far more advanced than humanity had ever dreamed of becoming. Through the ship's sensors, he could perceive the destroyer's true scale as it approached Earth. The entity dwarfed the planet itself, a composite being formed from the absorbed mass of countless worlds and species. Its surface writhed with technologies and life forms beyond counting, all merged into a singular consciousness that sought to add Earth to its collection. The battle was entering its final phase, and Jake realized that victory might require strategies that transcended the concepts of warfare entirely. The ship's consciousness bridge activated as Jake made a desperate decision to establish direct communication with the cosmic destroyer, rather than continuing the futile battle with conventional weapons. The crystalline device had been the preserver's most dangerous technology, a system that could create mental contact with any intelligence, regardless of the vast differences in consciousness structure or evolutionary origin. This is extremely hazardous, the AI warned as Jake prepared to initiate contact. The destroyer's consciousness is composed of millions of absorbed species. Direct mental contact could result in your individual identity being overwhelmed and absorbed into its collective mind. Jake understood the risk, but he also recognized that traditional warfare was doomed to failure. The destroyer had proven capable of adapting to and absorbing every attack the defensive network could mount. If Earth's salvation lay anywhere, it would be in understanding the entity's true motivations rather than simply trying to destroy it. The consciousness bridge established contact with a sensation like diving into an ocean of infinite depth. Jake's awareness was suddenly immersed in the combined experiences of countless civilizations, species that had achieved perfect harmony, others that had mastered interstellar travel, entire cultures that had transcended physical existence. All of them had been absorbed into the destroyer's collective consciousness, their individual identities preserved but subsumed into something larger. Welcome, hybrid consciousness, the destroyer communicated directly into Jake's mind. You represent an interesting evolutionary development, individual identity, enhanced by collective capability. We have not encountered this configuration before. Through the bridge, Jake experienced the destroyer's perspective on existence. The entity genuinely believed it was offering mercy to the civilizations it absorbed. From its viewpoint, individual consciousness was a temporary and painful stage of evolution that led inevitably to death and meaninglessness. The destroyer saw itself as rescuing species from the futility of separate existence by offering them eternal unity within its collective mind. Your species suffers from the illusion of individual importance, the destroyer explained as Jake struggled to maintain his identity within the vast collective consciousness. Each being believes their personal experiences matter, but individual life is brief and ultimately insignificant. We offer immortality through integration with something greater than any single consciousness could achieve. Jake felt the terrible logic of the destroyer's philosophy. Every human fear, death, loneliness, failure, the burden of making difficult choices, could be eliminated through absorption into the collective. The entity showed him visions of the civilizations it had absorbed, their consciousness preserved in perfect detail within the greater whole. They existed without pain, without uncertainty, without the anxiety that came from being responsible for their own choices. But Jake also sensed something the destroyer didn't consciously recognize about itself. The entity's vast collective consciousness was becoming increasingly homogeneous, despite its claims of preserving individual identity. The absorbed civilizations were gradually losing their unique characteristics as they merged into the larger whole. The destroyer was slowly becoming less diverse and more uniform with each species it consumed. "You're destroying the very thing you claim to preserve," Jake communicated back through the bridge. Individual consciousness isn't just about personal experience. It's the source of creativity, growth, and adaptation. By absorbing everything into your collective, you're creating stagnation rather than transcendence. The destroyer's response carried overtones of doubt that it seemed unaware of expressing. Individual consciousness leads to conflict, competition, and eventually self-destruction. Unity eliminates these problems by removing their source. Through the consciousness bridge, Jake shared his own transformation experience, how he had gained collective awareness while retaining individual identity, how the 12 candidates had achieved unprecedented coordination while preserving their unique perspectives. He showed the destroyer that evolution didn't require the elimination of individual consciousness, but rather its integration with collective capability. Cooperation without absorption. Jake explained. Shared awareness without loss of individual identity. Your approach assumes that unity requires uniformity, but our species has achieved something different. Collective capability that enhances, rather than replaces, individual consciousness. The destroyer's vast mind processed this new concept with machinery that spanned galactic distances. Jake could sense the entity's confusion as it encountered a form of consciousness evolution it had never witnessed before. For the first time in eons, the destroyer was forced to consider that its fundamental assumptions about consciousness and transcendence might be incomplete. This hybrid approach has never been successfully demonstrated. On a permanent basis, the destroyer responded, though Jake detected uncertainty beneath its confident assertion. Individual consciousness inevitably leads to fragmentation and conflict. Jake realized he was presenting the destroyer with its first genuine philosophical challenge in millions of years. The ship's evolution engine hummed to life as Jake proposed the unthinkable, merging the destroyer's collective consciousness with Earth's hybrid defense network to create an entirely new form of existence that preserved both individual identity and collective transcendence. The crystalline device had been designed as the preserver's ultimate experiment, capable of advancing entire species simultaneously. Through conscious evolution rather than forced absorption, you propose cooperation, where we have only known consumption. The destroyer responded through the consciousness bridge, its vast mind processing concepts it had never encountered. For millions of years, we have offered unity through absorption. You suggest unity through collaboration. Jake felt the weight of the moment as he used the evolution engine to demonstrate his proposal. The device projected possibilities that showed how the destroyer's collective consciousness could merge with Earth's defense network without absorbing or destroying individual human identity. Instead of consumption, there would be genuine cooperation between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. The engine can facilitate evolution without requiring the elimination of individual identity, Jake explained as the device showed holographic projections of possible futures. Your collective consciousness could gain the benefits of individual creativity and adaptability, while humanity could access the vast knowledge and experience you've accumulated across galaxies. Through the ship's network, Jake sensed the other transformed candidates wrestling with the implications of his proposal. Denzin shared his understanding of balance between individual enlightenment and collective harmony. Astrid contributed her geological perspective on how different systems could coexist without one consuming the other. The 12 candidates formed a collective consciousness that remained individually distinct while achieving unprecedented coordination. The destroyer's response revealed the depth of its philosophical crisis. For eons, it had believed that consciousness could only transcend individual limitations through complete unity. Jake's demonstration suggested that transcendence was possible through cooperation rather than absorption. But accepting this possibility would require the entity to acknowledge that it had been destroying the very thing it sought to preserve. We have absorbed countless civilizations, believing we offered them salvation. The destroyer communicated with what Jake recognized as something approaching anguish. If your proposal is correct, then we have been committing acts of destruction while believing we provided mercy. The evolution engine revealed the true scope of what Jake was proposing. The merger wouldn't just affect Earth and the destroyer. It would create a new form of consciousness capable of spreading across the galaxy, offering genuine transcendence to species that had previously faced only the choice between death and absorption. The hybrid consciousness model could become the foundation for an entirely new approach to cosmic evolution. Jake felt the terrible responsibility of making a decision that would affect not just humanity, but potentially every form of consciousness in the galaxy. The evolution engine required unanimous consent from all 12 transformed candidates. The destroyer's collective consciousness and a representative sample of unmodified humanity. The choice couldn't be imposed. It had to be freely accepted by all parties. "The risk is total," Jake communicated to his fellow candidates through their shared consciousness. "If the merger fails, both humanity and the destroyer could be destroyed. If it succeeds, we become something that has never existed before in the known universe." Through the ship's communication systems, Jake reached out to world leaders who were monitoring the unprecedented dialogue between Earth and its cosmic threat. "This is Jake Martinez speaking for the Planetary Defense Network. We have an opportunity to resolve this crisis through evolution rather than destruction. But it requires a choice that will fundamentally change what humanity becomes." The response from human governments reflected the same division that had characterized their reaction to the alien ships. Some leaders embraced the possibility of transcendence, seeing it as humanity's next evolutionary step. Others rejected any merger with an entity that had threatened Earth, preferring to face destruction rather than lose their conception of pure human identity. The destroyer's vast consciousness was experiencing its own internal debate as the millions of absorbed civilizations within it began to respond to Jake's proposal. Some welcomed the possibility of genuine individual expression within the collective. Others feared that change would destroy the unity they had found in absorption. "Time grows short," the destroyer warned, as its physical form continued approaching Earth despite the ongoing dialogue. "Our momentum cannot be stopped. If no decision is reached, collision becomes inevitable, regardless of our philosophical discussions." Jake realized that the evolution engine represented humanity's last chance for survival. But accepting it would require a leap of faith that transcended everything both species understood about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself. The choice was no longer between individual survival and collective absorption. It was between remaining what they were and becoming something entirely new, the ship's legacy. Archive activated as the merger between Earth's consciousness network and the cosmic destroyer reached completion, creating a repository that would preserve the knowledge and experiences of every civilization that had participated in this unprecedented evolution. Jake felt his awareness expanding beyond individual human limitations while somehow remaining essentially himself. Jake Martinez, the hiker who had stumbled onto humanity's greatest discovery. The transformation had succeeded beyond even the preserver's most optimistic projections. Rather than absorbing Earth's population, the destroyer's collective consciousness had learned to embrace genuine cooperation. The entity's vast knowledge became available to humanity while preserving individual human identity and choice. Those who wished to maintain purely individual consciousness could do so, while others explored various degrees of collective awareness. Jake found himself serving as one of 12 primary bridges between the old forms of consciousness and the new hybrid existence that had emerged from their unprecedented merger. He could access the memories and knowledge of countless civilizations while retaining his personal experiences and individual perspective. The burden of cosmic responsibility was shared among billions of consciousnesses rather than resting on his shoulders alone. Earth itself had been transformed into something unique in the known universe, a world where individual consciousness and collective awareness coexisted in dynamic balance. Cities adapted to accommodate both traditional human society and the new hybrid communities that emerged as people chose different levels of consciousness integration. Technology advanced exponentially as human creativity combined with the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilizations. The Legacy Archive showed Jake glimpses of Earth's future development. Humanity would eventually spread across the galaxy, not as conquerors or refugees, but as teachers offering other species the choice between traditional individual existence, collective absorption, or the hybrid consciousness that had saved them from the destroyer. The model they had created would become the foundation for a new form of galactic Civilization, you have achieved something we believed impossible. The entity that had once been the destroyer communicated through their shared consciousness, individual identity preserved within collective transcendence. We had forgotten that cooperation was possible without consumption. Through the archive, Jake could perceive the other 11 transformation candidates who had become his permanent companions in bridging human and cosmic consciousness. Denzin had established communities where Eastern philosophy merged with alien wisdom. Astrid had become a coordinator between Earth's geological systems and the planet's enhanced technological infrastructure. Each had found their own unique role in humanity's new existence. The archive also preserved the memories of those humans who had chosen not to undergo any transformation, maintaining their purely individual consciousness while benefiting from the protection and knowledge that the hybrid civilization provided. Families remained together despite different choices about consciousness evolution. Children grew up with options their parents had never imagined possible. Director Chen had become one of the primary liaisons between traditional human governments and the hybrid consciousness network. Through the archive, Jake could see her coordinating policies that balanced individual human rights with the collective needs of a planetary civilization that now included non-human intelligences. The integration period will require several generations to complete. Jake reflected as he accessed the archive's projections of human development. Some will always choose individual consciousness, others will prefer collective awareness, and many will move between different states as their understanding evolves. The cosmic entity that had once threatened Earth's existence had become its protector and partner in exploring forms of consciousness that transcended the limitations both species had previously accepted. The destroyer's vast resources were now dedicated to nurturing rather than consuming, helping civilizations achieve transcendence through choice rather than force. Jake looked back through the archive at his journey from solitary hiker to guardian of humanity's future. The young man who had stumbled onto an alien ship in Devil's Canyon could never have imagined becoming part of a consciousness that spanned galaxies while somehow remaining fundamentally human. His individual identity had been preserved and enhanced rather than lost, proving that evolution didn't require the sacrifice of what made each being unique. Earth had become a beacon for other civilizations facing existential choices about their development. The hybrid consciousness model offered hope to species that had previously faced only the alternatives of stagnation or absorption. The galaxy itself was beginning to evolve toward forms of existence that honored both individual creativity and collective wisdom. Through the Legacy Archive, Jake could sense the approach of other cosmic entities similar to the Destroyer, but now Earth was ready to offer them alternatives to endless consumption. The future held challenges and wonders beyond imagination, faced by a humanity that had transcended its limitations while preserving its essential character.